Thanks everyone for joining us on the same boat. I'm joined by Pastor Wilson Wang from Renew OC. Hey, Wilson.
Hello.
We're going to be finishing off a really provocative series about the silent Exodus. And we're going to be talking about the topic of missing home after you have left the immigrant church. But before we do a dive into that, we actually have some listener feedback. So I'm going to go ahead and read what some people have sent to us by way of response. And by the way, thanks for all the listeners for giving us the feedback. It's really helpful.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for writing to us. It means so much.
Yeah. So one person said, thanks for sharing the podcast. I listened to it and it opened something up for me in the conversation of working under leadership that doesn't listen to their team. I realized that that's why I changed jobs last year. It's a different context and yet the same principles apply. So yeah, I thought that was really cool that this person had some dots connected as they listened to the No Voice episode. So that was really cool. And another person wrote kind of a longer context thing, which I'm not going to get into, but they had an essential question that they want to ask. And that is, how do you speak into issues that you have with the church? And this person stepped down from a leadership role because they did have issues with the church. How do you speak into issues that you have with the church when people ask you without giving too much details, simply because it wouldn't be edifying or beneficial, and also trying to stay away from gossip or slander, yet feeling a deep conviction and disappointment in the status quo? So do you understand that question, Wilson?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I feel like I've been in that situation before. And even with me and Roy, our third podcast, we actually cut out a large segment
We did.
because I felt really torn about the story I shared. I checked in with a few people who said it would be hurtful, and Roy was like, "That's your best story." I invited you on the thing for that story. So sorry, Roy, but of course you were extremely gracious, extremely understanding.
Well,
As I
gracious,
would,
you're gracious to your face, but crying myself to sleep at night.
so that's your full time job as a therapist. Gracious to the face, crying yourself to sleep. And so yeah, I think some of the answer was in the question where he said he wants to share what's edifying
Yeah.
and really trying to parse out like where's the anger in this? Where's the bitterness? Where's my hurt? And how do I talk to Roy Kim about that? You know, and my close friends outside of the church. And then where's the piece where it really needs to be confronted, not for me, but for the people in the ministry? And who do I talk to that's appropriate? So if you're in junior high ministry, you don't want to pull your sixth grader aside
No.
and dump on your church. But is there an elder? Is there a coworker? Is there someone of influence who you might be able to share that concern with? And there is also this point of surrender where you do dust off your sandals, let's say, um, and give the church to the Lord for Him to judge, for Him to care for Him to own, and for you to say this is not mine anymore, and that's very
Mhm.
difficult.
Mm.
So there was definitely a few of those incidences in my life, and I don't think I handled it perfectly. But if I were to look back and give myself some advice, that would probably be what I would say.
I think that's wise. I think you said the key word, person of influence. If you have certain issues with the church, I mean, okay, yeah, sometimes it feels nice to vent, but don't you actually want your complaint, maybe your valid complaint, to fall upon an ear that could affect change? So if it's a person of influence, then maybe that's your best shot of
Yeah.
actually enacting change. And let's say you do give that person the complaint and no change arises. I think you've got your answer, like you've done all that you could and you hit a brick wall. And you're not going to smash down the brick wall. So can you just kind of accept this loss and grieve it without needing to uh, complain to anyone and everyone who would listen and like no change, develop. So yeah, I think your answer is a really wise one.
I do wonder, Roy, when you would just say, "Hey, let's just try to get as many people out as possible." Like, is there a point in time where you are
Yeah,
telling everyone, and basically whoever can drive, you're like, "Hey, let's go Saddleback."
I
You
know.
know, we know it's
Yeah,
safe
yeah,
there.
I know. I do remember you saying that in the previous episode, like, there's a part of me that wishes I would have just kind of taken some people with me because it was just so unhealthy, right? I don't know how to answer that. Because I totally understand that sentiment. I totally understand why people would go the opposite direction and say, you know what, like, I'm going to go my path, and if you have a higher threshold of pain than I do, then you're just going to stay there, and maybe you'll learn one day, what I learned. I don't know if there's a right answer for that, man.
Mm,
But I do understand what you mean by wanting to kind of maybe rescue some people out of unnecessary pain, unnecessary toxicity. Ah, debatable.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think extremely clear would be like sexual harassment
Oh
or
man.
extreme bullying, but most of the time it's not that.
That's right. I
And
mean,
then it gets
there
harder.
are laws set up in society to rescue people from certain things where they can't rescue themselves.
Yeah.
But there are certain reasons why certain people stay in toxic situations, and they are, grown blank adults. And so like they're gonna do things that they're gonna do. And if we kind of rescue them out of it, then I'm not sure whether that is enabling behavior or whether
Mm.
that's codependency or something like that, but it's a tough one.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the question. We really appreciate it. And yeah, just grateful for allowing our voice into your earbuds. So,
Yeah, yeah. And if this inspires you to ask more questions, then please submit them to the same boat pod at gmail.com. So let's get into the topic of um, missing home, right? Let's say you have left the immigrant church that you have grown up in, and for XYZ reason, you have left that church, but there's a pretty big part of you that does miss home. I'm sure that this is something that will resonate for a lot of people who did grow up in the immigrant church. So, where do you want to start with this, Wilson?
yeah, I think first I just want to say that it's amazing to see an immigrant church come together where they are recreating home as a first gen immigrant, Chinese, Korean, coming out of, from my parents, Taiwan, leaving their parents, leaving their brothers and sisters, their neighborhood, their closest friends, being dropped off in Texas, and totally culture shock, going to California, and then building a church and a faith around Chinese food, the language, other people who share their ethnic background, and really finding a home space there, finding new grandparents, new parents, new brothers and sisters, new nephews and nieces. And for me to walk into that home environment was such a privilege. A lot of times, majority culture church talk about church as family, but it's almost impossible to experience that the way an immigrant family would experience it. We don't have anyone else here oftentimes, and majority culture has everyone else here. So there was something just really intimate and true to what family looked like in an immigrant church. I remember after church, there would be aunties and grandmas in the kitchen, and they would cook lunch for hundreds of people. They had these rice cookers that even as an adult, if I try to wrap my arms around them, I couldn't like touch my fingers, and they would just cook like amazing beef in soy sauce. They would cook rice. They would cook veggies, and hundreds of people would have lunch together after church. So it'd be a Sunday service from 9 to 11. We would eat lunch together. We would loiter at church. We'd go play basketball. We would have dinner. We'd go loiter at someone else's house. And it was truly family there. And I just think, in contrast, I have friends in Colorado trying to find a church as Asian Americans, and they want to loiter after church, but like maybe 10 minutes after church, the pastor's like flashing the lights in the sanctuary trying to send them home. People are trying to beat each other out of the parking lot so they don't get stuck, so they're leaving halfway through the last song.
Get out!
And
I want to go home and drink a beer, watch a Broncos game.
yeah, exactly. And outside of the really structured small group Sundays, it's often these people are not really integrated in all the other aspects of life. They're not integrated in a multi-generational way. And so I think that's something that we can miss very easily as we leave home. And also, I'd say something maybe that the Asian American church offers, right? We don't cook rice for 100, but we're loitering after church for an hour and a half. We go eat. A lot of people have open home policies at Renew where you can just crash their place. And I see the Chinese church, the Chinese immigrant church, informing how I view church and how we live in community at Renew. And it's really, yeah, I really have benefited from that.
It's so interesting how you described your history with the immigrant church, the Chinese immigrant church. There's a lot of striking parallels between that and the Korean immigrant churches that I've been a part of. Definitely a lot of loitering. It's an all-day affair. Especially if you are, let's say, helping with praise, or if you are a Bible study teacher, you are there early. You're setting up folding chairs, especially for the smaller churches. The big vats of rice. For Koreans, famously, there's like curry rice, and they say kare. There's
Yes.
sometimes like big, just soupy rice, 국밥, that has either potato or daikon or some sort of beef chunks in it, and everyone's just kind of in line to get their bowl of soupy rice or their kare, and greeting the middle-aged women, and sometimes the men in aprons, who are serving, giving out the food. And it's just like this familiar sight to greet them as your uncles and your aunties, and sitting down and eating together. You just don't see that in white churches. I haven't visited enough Black churches or Latinx churches to know what that's like over there. But as far as like most of the white churches that I visited, that just does not exist. That communal feel, right? So I can see how people can feel homesick if they do exit an immigrant church and maybe they land themselves at a big white church. That may be a real missing component. They're like, where is that? Where is that familiar feeling, right?
Yeah. And I think even the language we use to actually call one generation of uncle and auntie, to call 2 generations of grandma, grandpa.
Yeah.
And there is a sense of ownership there. It's not just a word, but you really treat them as auntie and uncle. And I feel like there's that multi-generational care because it's family. Whereas a lot of churches, majority culture churches, are extremely segregated. And it's like almost inappropriate for an older man to talk to like a teenage girl.
Oh, for sure.
Care for them. But in our church, that was like, it was every Sunday. Every Sunday, the uncles and aunties would care for the children, the teenagers, the young adults. And there was definitely this sense of trust, and it could be abused, but I would say it very often was not. it was very often healthy and truly like family.
Right. There's even like you mentioned the word caring for the kids. Like sometimes the caring involves scolding, right?
Yes,
And
ultimate
and yet
care.
and yeah, and that's very familiar. Like, to have an auntie or an uncle scold you, for I don't know, like because you ate with your mouth open, or you're just kind of doing something that's not good
Yeah,
manners, and they're
yeah,
scolding you, and you're
yeah,
like, and you kind of accept that as love.
yeah.
Whereas if that happened at a white church,
And
right?
someone would have
And
to
someone is
leave.
scolding you for something that's very like cultural, like culturally Asian or whatever, you'd be like, don't you dare talk to my son like that, or don't,
Absolutely.
yeah, like totally hands off.
We're not family, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
You're
You're not family.
Yeah, we're not
It's
family.
so funny.
Wow. I love like the way you describe the food line, the way you describe scolding. It's like I could smell the
I
curry
know.
and I could hear the scolding. And even the scolding is like I'm having happy memories from that, you know? And even especially in Korean culture and Chinese too, there's really that older brother, younger sibling. Like I know my wife's Korean, so even if you're older, but you have that type of camaraderie in a church, you really treat each other as older brother, younger sister.
Yeah.
And yeah, sometimes you like your sibling as well, as a romantically, but you
Yes.
also have that sense of care and ownership and um yeah, very sweet memories in that
Man,
way.
you and I are gonna have to talk about that maybe in a future episode about the older brother, younger
Incest and
sister, quote unquote, that whole relationship, you being married to a Korean woman, the word oppa, right? So
hmm.
that whole thing can be very, very blurry. So and very, very confusing. So we
Yeah.
should delve into that as well. Um, and I spoke to my wife about this question before our recording, and when she left her immigrant church, um, and she went to a large white church, she was uh, mind blown by the amount of support ministries that
Hmm.
exist at a larger white church.
Hmm.
They would have things like divorce care, grief share. Um, I don't know whether that particular church had like, step families or blended families ministries, um, but, like 12 steps, things like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Wilson, do you know of many immigrant churches, even like some of the larger ones that have like that specific type of support ministries, like that name the issue that people are going through?
I really don't. I think it's a shame-based culture. So you
Right.
showing up to like a AA,
Yeah.
I mean, and you're 3 generations into this church,
Right.
how's grandma gonna feel? How's your sister's family going to feel?
That's right.
No one's getting an eldership position, so it's very easy, sadly, to hide some of those things, to deal with it in the home, and to present your best on Sundays.
That's right.
I think the healthier immigrant churches will broach some of those topics, but
Mhm.
it's yeah, it's hard to imagine many of them being able to share in small group or on a Sunday service about domestic violence, about
Right.
drunkenness, about
Right.
pornography, and that's a shame because those things are, they plague everyone across generation culture.
That's
No one's
right.
exempt.
Yeah.
So that
Uh,
is, yeah, too
So
bad.
yeah, so she was going to these larger white churches, and she was so happy to see these support ministries because they spoke to her situation.
Mm,
And yet, as she enters into those support ministries, because these are larger white churches, there are few people who look like her. And so there's that missing home component where you kind of still feel like the other.
yeah.
And Whereas if you go to an immigrant church and everyone looks like um, you feel like you can be your natural self to an extent, except for the fact that they don't have support ministries, right?
Right.
So it's kind of a, I don't know, is that a catch-22 thing? But it's tough. It's tough to exit the immigrant church and try to find everything that you're looking for, because I'm not sure that that's so easy to find.
Yeah, and I think that's another space that Asian Americans get to step into. And
Mhm.
obviously, your work in sexual addiction as a therapist is unique because of your ethnicity, because you're opening up this conversation to Korean Americans, Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, just that whole continent, Indian Americans. There's so few voices that are able to hold something that we can feel ashamed of and unnamed with the ethnicity that we reside in, because addiction, you have to entangle both.
Yeah,
Our ethnicity is very much a part of how we overcome addiction or overcome by addiction.
right, right.
So another way that I feel like there's a sharp contrast between our home immigrant church, and going to a majority culture church is the view of the pastor. So I've heard from a friend who works at these large mega churches with multiple campuses that many Asian Americans, after a while, they are not able to go to a satellite campus because they have these memories of their youth pastor being in their home, their lead pastor going to the first birthday party of their son or daughter,
Yeah.
and just that really intimate relationship. Like my youth pastor, he really became an older brother to me. In fifth grade, I felt really alone, and he discipled me in such a intimate way where he'd come over 3 times a week. My mom would cook dinner for him. He taught me how to play basketball. I mean, he must have spent hundreds, thousands of hours with me, which is very inefficient in terms of ministry. But I'm really a product of his care and of his mentorship. And then if I were to go to, again, a big church and see a pastor on a screen and really have no access to the main teaching voice in my life, for me, it would be extremely difficult because of that huge chasm between my home experience, my home church experience, and this, majority culture church.
Hmm.
And I have seen that at Renew, because we are pretty diverse, about 25% majority culture white, 60% Asian American, 10-15% Latino.
Right.
That people really bring different expectations to me. Yeah, and it's really interesting to live in a world where some people are just happy I said hello and know their name most of the time, and other people are mad that I didn't ask them to go to coffee when they didn't
Yeah.
tell me that they wanted to go to
Oh,
coffee.
that's
Like
interesting.
I didn't mind read them, and so I just see that contrast. It's hard to scale a church with those expectations. I'll say that.
Ah, I mean, so then in a situation like that, is it helpful to actually ask the people what's your expectation of me, or is that too much?
I think for me, I have to set the expectation for
Ah,
what I'm capable of, and really wanting a pastor for every life stage, so that they have someone to go to that can
mhm.
have coffee.
Yeah.
But I am pretty available, Roy. Like if you wanted to hang out, no, but usually within 2 weeks I can grab a coffee with someone, and if it's
Mm,
urgent, it'd probably be within the week. So that's as available as I think you can get it for
yeah.
places.
In the Korean immigrant church, there's an actual term, for these pastoral visitations. They call it shimbang.
Uh-huh.
And they take it very seriously. They
Yeah.
schedule these out so that they are, finding out where the people's homes are, and
Mm.
either driving alone to it or bringing like another elder with them, or whoever, whatever it is, to kind of,
Yeah.
like, that's such a ingrained part of the pastoral care That's such an
Yeah.
expected part of what a pastor should do. And I wonder, um, you talk about inefficiency. I remember having a talk with one pastor saying exactly that. He just didn't know whether he could sustain that, especially as the church was growing larger.
Mm.
And this was in like a Korean American church context, where I think the members still kind of wanted that visitation thing that
Yeah.
they remember from their immigrant church.
Yeah.
And so his philosophy was, I think what I'll do is I will do regular visitations of my staff. Like I will visit my staff members, and the staff members will disperse
Yeah.
the great diaspora, and they will be doing the visitations of their tribe, the mini tribes, right? So
Right.
that everyone gets visited, but maybe not all by the head pastor, right?
Right.
So I thought that was an interesting way of doing it, although I do wonder whether some of the members are thinking, man, I still want the head pastor to be the one that visits
Because
me.
if you're in a Korean church, the head pastor counts. No one else really does. Maybe number two, But if the number two guy comes in, you kind of know where you stand.
Yeah. So I don't know, Wilson, what do you think? Like, let's say for for an Asian American person, like would you just want to be visited at all by some member of the staff, or would you still like dig your heels and say, no, I want Wilson to be the one that visits me?
Yeah, man, I at this point it would be honestly really difficult to visit everyone in a systematic way.
Yeah.
But I could visit everyone who's asking me to visit them. And I
Mhm.
really make that a priority.
Yeah.
So I just feel like in a lot of ways we're a cheaper version of our of the home church. It's like kind of like, you know, it's kind of that middle ground. But I feel like as Asian Americans, that's kind of where we reside all the time. It's not home. It's not white. It's
Yeah.
somewhere. It's some cheap version of I don't know. It's some blend, a fusion of both. Yeah. The last thing I was thinking about, Roy, is the authority that a lead pastor carries in both contexts, in a
Uh,
majority context as well as a Chinese or Korean American context. That there's almost this prophetic and fatherly voice. To disobey your lead pastor is almost to disobey your father, or maybe
I
worse.
think you're right.
And the obedience is assumed. It's assumed if they talk to you that you're gonna basically do what they say.
Mhm.
And I feel like when I talk to people outside of the pulpit, it's more of a suggestion. It's like say, oh, there's an option.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's times and I've really grown into my lead pastor position. I think the
Uh,
first 3-4 years I was a founding pastor that operated as an associate pastor.
Interesting.
And maybe the last 3 years, 4 years, I feel like I've carried that mantle of vision and authority. So there is this thing that I miss about the home church where you knew who your pastor was and you knew how to submit to under them. Of course,
Hmm.
there's abuse as well that's probable in that, or that you can be abused in that type of hierarchy.
Hmm.
But man, Roy, there's just so many times where I wish people just did what I told them to do.
Such an Asian dad.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying like there's a lot of things that I'm not talking about, but like when it's like, hey, can you not travel with your girlfriend because you're probably gonna have sex, Can you can you not sleep over? You might get pregnant. Can you not get plastered when you're drinking? And then I think like we do some church discipline where people who are violating these ethics aren't serving on worship or leading, but I think it's not the scepter of the Chinese or Korean lead pastor. And I think at a white church, again, if it's a mega church, Rick Warren's talking to you on a screen, like there's not even
Yeah,
there's not even direct imperatives
that's so
from him.
interesting. Right,
And
right.
so yeah, so I'm just thinking about that a little bit as
Do you
well.
ever wonder whether some members wish that their church just gets large so that they can become more and more anonymous?
Yeah,
Or
or
do you think they're there?
the pastor wants that as well,
What?
so the expectations are diluted. It's like if we were only 1,000 people, no one would really want me in their living room anymore. Like, yeah.
Yeah, because what pastor enjoys, conflict and um doing church discipline? I don't think any church enjoys
No.
any pastor enjoys doing that. I think if they do
Yeah.
enjoy it, they're probably still a little bit sick, but
Yeah, I'm seeing that too. Do you feel like there's any part of that you miss? Maybe that's the part we don't miss as Asian Americans. But I think for me, there was a comfort in someone being accountable for my spiritual journey and soul. And they're not 100% accountable. They're not more accountable than me. But I felt like I often, for the majority of my time at my home church, someone else was also looking after me. And I could almost count on being called out if, one on one, mostly in a loving way, if I was just veering off track
Mhm,
versus like you go off track and people don't even notice. No one's going to talk to you about it.
mhm,
Um, no one feels that responsibility. And
mhm,
I'm not saying, that's an Asian or white thing,
mhm.
but I do think there was something that I really loved about that.
Part of, I think, I think my reply to that depends a bit on that person's family of origin experience.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is, I think if they longed for dad or mom to notice them, to be attuned to what that person was going through, and if they long for that parent to respond to them in a way that helped them feel seen or heard,
Yeah.
then I think maybe they'll long for that from their pastor too.
Mm.
Um, and maybe if they got that from their parents, then maybe there's not as much of a deficit where they feel like the pastor needs to compensate for that,
Mm-hmm.
if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I feel like sometimes it could be extra charged. That longing for that could be extra charged based upon what they experienced in their family of origin.
Yeah, I like that. I think when I did prison ministries for a little bit, and when I look at the successful churches that minister to prisoners, which is not easy, they are fathers to them. They're
Interesting.
pretty strong, almost legalistic. If you came out of a healthy family
Yeah.
environment, you'd be
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
wow, they're like super dominating
Hmm.
and very rigid.
Hmm.
But it's almost exactly what some of those guys need is a
Hmm.
father.
Hmm.
And then I do think about what a healthy shepherd looks like. I think
Hmm.
there has to be some kind of going after the lost sheep and mending wounds and taking some kind of responsibility because we are, as pastors, we are giving an account for
Yeah.
people's soul, right? So it's like
Yeah.
don't make your pastor weary. Don't exhaust them because they have
Yeah.
to give an account for your soul. Um, so I do take that to heart, and I think there's a cap on how many people I feel like I can do that with
Yeah. I
on my
agree.
own.
I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah,
I think the
yeah.
last thing I'll say, just about this topic, and maybe we can close after this, is I think when a person leaves the immigrant church and they go to, either a big white church or a big multi-ethnic church or, any other type of non-Asian dominant church, and then they start to miss home. I think part of it has to do with what I learned recently when I watched this talk given by Dr. Jessica Kim
Mm,
from Mustard Seed Generation. And she was talking about the the experiences of Asians growing up in white dominant America as feeling like the other all the time. And when you enter into a church where it's like your ethnic demographics, there's this tangible and intangible feeling of I belong here.
Hmm.
Even if there's all the kind of the unhealthy family dynamic stuff that comes along with it, but there's that feeling of everyone looks like me. This is the culture that I'm familiar with. And even if the theology is jacked up, I'm still, I feel like there's what she calls like even some racial healing that
Yeah.
a person experiences in the immigrant church. And when you go to a white dominant church from that, you're kind of reminded of the racial tension that maybe you grew up with when you were younger, where you go to
Mm.
school and again, it's white dominant and all the teachers are white and all that kind of stuff. It's like that all those things kind of get unearthed sometimes when you get back into a white dominant culture, you know. So
Yeah.
I want to just put that out there because I felt that that was a very provocative statement that she made that resonated with me. And
Yeah.
if that lands with some of the listeners, then I'm glad that they can think through that and maybe talk about that with their friends too.
I think just to add to that, if you're an Asian American going to a majority culture church, I hope that they see you, and I hope that they see the unique aspects of a healthy church that your ethnicity gets to offer, right?
Mhm.
Another view of what it means to be community, to be family, to have a relationship with the shepherd, to eat amazing food, rice-based foods, right? And so I think a healthy church, regardless of ethnicity, looks at those who are not the majority and says, "You have something about church and God to gift our community." So
Mhm.
I hope that you would be invited in that way, and that you would know you have something to gift.
I like that a lot. Um, And I think that's a good place to end on that note. Um, yeah, thanks everyone for listening to this episode, to this podcast. I really hope that there was something that Wilson and I said that made you feel like you're not alone, that there are others in the same boat as you. And if you have any feedback for us or any questions that you'd like for us to try to tackle on air, then you can submit them to the same boat pod@gmail.com. And yeah, Wilson, thanks for going through this series with me. I really enjoyed it. And I hope that you were able to get at least a little bit of free therapy.
So-
All right, everyone. Please embark safely.